All right, we will get started. Let me see, Cyrille, can we see your slides? Got it. There we go. Okay, so we'll get started. Hello and welcome to our webinar, Orchestrating the Continuous Delivery Process in Jenkins with Workflow. My name is Alyssa Tong and I'm with CloudBees. Today's webinar is presented by CloudBees. CloudBees is the Jenkins Enterprise Experts and the leading provider of Jenkins solutions for continuous integration and continuous delivery. Next slide, please. Our presenters for today are Cyrille Clerc and Steve Harris. Cyrille is Director of Product Management, and Steve is Senior Vice President of Products. In this webinar, Cyrille and Steve will address the business and technical aspects of continuous delivery. They will deep dive into how the new workflow feature is the engine that automates the continuous delivery process to drive faster application delivery. Next slide, please. So before I pass it over to Steve, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping points. We are recording today's session. If you have any questions, please feel free to input them in the Q&A window throughout the presentation. We are fortunate today to have Jesse Glick, one of the first Jenkins committers, behind the scenes to answer your questions in real time. Cyrille and Steve will also be answering questions via the Q&A window when they are not presenting. And at the end of our presentation, we will have a Q&A session if time allows. And any questions that we don't get to, we will cover it in our follow-up email. And again, as mentioned earlier, today's webinar is being recorded and we'll send out the recording to everyone who registered. So at this point, Steve will take over and go through the business aspect of continuous delivery.
Okay, thanks very much, Alyssa. And it's really a pleasure to be here today, actually physically with Cyrille, who is normally in Paris, and it's great we have Jesse online to answer questions in real time. So I'm just going to start by talking about continuous delivery overall, and then specifically how people are using Jenkins to really do continuous delivery today, prior really to the introduction of this new workflow feature, which is really a great addition and advance in terms of the way that Jenkins can be used to achieve continuous delivery. Then we're going to turn it over to Cyrille, and he will talk in some depth about the new Jenkins workflow engine, the syntax kind of feature function that it provides. And then at the end, we will take a look around the corner a bit at what's coming, both in open source Jenkins as well as the commercial CloudBees products that build on top of it. So to start off with, first of all, Alyssa, can you double check that the sound is working okay? Confirm, please.
Yes, for me, it's working fine, and we are getting just about 1 or 2 people that cannot hear us, so I will work with them, but the rest of the people seems to be able to hear us fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to start off with, the seminal text really on continuous delivery. If you don't have this on your real or virtual bookshelf, you certainly should. Jez Humble and Dave Farley's book. And they really capture continuous delivery as being the process for reliable software releases from build, test, through deployment automation. And one of the real keys of differences between continuous delivery and the continuous integration that we're all kind of used to is that the definition of done fundamentally changes. Done is when things are shippable into production. That does not necessarily mean that you pushed bits into production, but what it does mean is that you are keeping your software in a release-ready state at all times, and continuous delivery then really encompasses the mechanics around doing that. So from a continuous integration point of view, it really encompasses connection to source code repositories such as Git and Subversion. As code changes are made and pushed to those repositories, you kick off unit testing with tools like JUnit and so on. You do your build to kick off your unit testing against it and so on. You might, from there, once those are successful, kick off steps like code quality checks using Sonar or find bugs. You might do security checks against your code check-ins and so on. Ultimately, you produce some kind of binary artifact like a WAR file, which you would store in a repository like Nexus or Artifactory. And this process goes on so that the developers who are making those code changes know as early as possible, as far upstream as possible, that their work is correct and didn't break anything, and you keep things in a running state at all times. Now, and when you move to continuous delivery, you really expand the scope, because what you want to do, again, is keep your software in a release-ready state. That means that you need to address deeper QA, functional testing, maybe performance regression testing. When people make changes, it's hard for them to understand how they've impacted performance of the product in some fashion. You might kick off user acceptance testing against a deployed staging environment and fold that into your overall test process. When you are then ready to push a release, that might be gated by your development team, it might be gated by a QA team, might hold the semaphore for that, it might be a business person. You might then push to a staging environment like a pre-production environment, and then you might then use an ops team, or people are more focused on the operational aspects, to roll things out into production environment using techniques like blue-green deployment and so on. So you really push the boundaries beyond the continuous integration stage to include the aspects of automation and testing that are associated with delivery processes and making sure that things work in production. You do this by creating what's typically referred to as a continuous delivery pipeline. So think about it as starting with compiling code, running these unit tests. After that point, you might want to run various tests in parallel. They might take a significant amount of time. So check-ins might be gated by unit tests, but functional testing, it kicks off in parallel type of steps for doing performance testing, maybe Selenium testing for multi-browsers. You might have to retry those type of operations, code quality, and so on. When all of those parallel things are done, then you join back together, and now you can push to a staging environment for user acceptance testing. You might have manual intervention, people gates imposed between user acceptance testing and pushing to a pre-production staging area. And again, you might have operational or business type of interventions gating the pushing of the artifacts that are produced during these earlier stages into production. And so you create these continuous delivery pipelines in this fashion. Jenkins is really, I think, taken hold as the kind of orchestrator across all of these processes that are often performed across an organization by various teams. So Jenkins becomes kind of the hub of continuous delivery. It connects all the individual pieces, the teams together, and so on. It really is the pushing this work across an organization. And it's worthwhile, I think, at least noting that the pushing of bits to these environments, the actual deployment of these bits, the configuration automation step is a key part of continuous delivery itself. And that is also often coordinated by Jenkins or with Jenkins. So as you start to use configuration as code and tools like Puppet and Chef and so on, that configuration, the Puppet deployment modules and so on are pushed into a Git repository that can cause Jenkins then to use Puppet or Chef to, with other tools like Vagrant, to push to a development environment, to push to a staging area for QA testing, for functional testing, and so on. Then the artifacts, the same binaries that you use in testing, development, and QA, can be pushed by an ops person independently to the production environment. And Jenkins can be used then to couple these together using notification mechanisms. So we recently did some work in open source Jenkins to integrate the fingerprinting mechanism that Jenkins already has to track binaries with the deployment actions that are the configuration actions that are taken by Chef and Puppet. So when a binary is deployed using Chef or Puppet to an environment, then Chef or Puppet can actually notify Jenkins that the artifact with this fingerprint was deployed. And so again, Jenkins kind of becomes the center point where the information about a check-in, creating a binary, and passing tests and moving through the continuous delivery pipeline was then deployed using Chef or Puppet, and that deployment action is then notified back to Jenkins so that when you use Jenkins to look at an artifact and trace its fingerprint across this delivery cycle, then you have the same information that you now know that Puppet, in this example here, deployed that artifact to a specific host at a specific time. So it really gives you this kind of end-to-end traceability. Now, we talk about continuous delivery pipelines, yet what we're really introducing is workflow. So is this workflow? Is this a pipeline? Why didn't we call this something about pipelines in Jenkins? Why did we choose this workflow term? And the answer is that it's really a lot more. I think we spend a lot of time talking with people who are using Jenkins in real continuous delivery type of environments, large organizations, how they propagate work across the organization is really what's hard and interesting to them and what they really are using Jenkins to do. So what we found really was that we needed more than just being able to define these stages and trigger one into another and so on. What we found in the community was people needed to be able to define really arbitrarily complex pipelines with multiple stages. They needed real control flow logic to be wrapped around these things. Their continuous delivery pipelines run for a long time. They might take an arbitrarily long time if human interaction was involved that's dependent upon a business decision and so on. The systems that they have to propagate this work using Jenkins need to be resilient. They need to stand up in the face of transient errors, and when errors do occur, which they do for some whatever reason, they need to be able to kind of restart their continuous delivery process where it left off. They wanted to be able to treat these workflows, these pipelines, as the way they treat code. They wanted to think about reusing these definitions. And they really were, I think, passionate in the community about wanting to be able to do this with a kind of a textual representation so you could actually store these workflows as continuous delivery pipeline information in a source code control system, just like they're doing everything else. So these are, I think, the learning experiences that we gained from people using Jenkins really to do workflow today. They use things like job chaining that's built into Jenkins, so you can trigger builds and do post-build actions. They used existing plugins like the build flow plugin to declare how things can be done in parallel and so on. They use a build pipeline plugin to be able to visualize their pipelines. They use the build delivery plugin to kind of gain a viewpoint into multiple delivery pipelines. So there's been a lot of ground covered, I think, today in how people are using Jenkins to do continuous delivery, and that's really fundamentally informed us on how to do that. So today when they do it, they have many atomic jobs running. It's sometimes difficult to share variables in state. There's limitations on the logic they can wrap around it and so on. And these issues that people see in terms of how they use Jenkins to build continuous delivery pipelines and execute continuous delivery have been addressed in this workflow plugin. So I'm going to turn over to Cyrille, and he'll give you a lot of detail on exactly how to do this and show it to you in action.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Steve. So I'm going to present you the Jenkins Workflow Engine, which is a new feature. I will illustrate this new feature with a sample. So my demo will be with Spring Pet Clinic, which is a very typical sample for Java web application. We will do compile on unit test, and then in parallel we will do performance test with JMeter, Selenium test with this retry because there are sometimes glitches, with web browser tests that do not mean that the application is broken, but just that there is a glitch. Sonar source code analysis, and then I will deploy to a user acceptance test environment. For my test environments, performance, Selenium, and the others, I will use Tomcat to demo, and I will then deploy to staging and so on. So let's simplify a bit. I will not cover the deployment on the production environment because in many organizations it's a different process. It's not directly triggered by Jenkins, so I will just focus on this from compile unit test until staging environment. This is what I will demo today with Jenkins Workflow. To remember what we expect, we want complex pipeline with multiple stages. So if we remember the stages, we have performance test environment, deployment on user acceptance test environment, staging environment, and so on, so many stages. I have a non-sequential logic with loops, with forks, joins. So here the fork and join are these parallel tasks with JMeter, Selenium, and Sonar in parallel. I have loops with this retry on Selenium, for example, things like this. I have long-running builds, and I want them to survive outages. If I look at performance tests, they can take several hours. If I look at human tests by the QA team, it can take days, and I want to be able to restart my Jenkins server without breaking everything, without losing my work. I want user interactions, human interactions with pause and input. So here I will have my user acceptance test team, my QA team, which will validate the deployment to say we can go further. I want restartable builds in case of transient errors. So here I automate the deployment on the performance test environment, but sometimes an environment is under maintenance, is not available, and so I will have an error in my deployment, and I will want to be able to restart just this phase, this step of the workflow, and not restart from the beginning. So this is a restartable build. I want to be able to reuse the definition because many applications in my organization will have the same pipeline, the same workflow, same process. And I want to have a comprehensible script with one clear definition of what I do, what I did. If we remember in the past with the previous solutions we have in Jenkins and that Steve presented, I had tons of small jobs which was not easy to manage. Here I would like to have one clear definition. So this is what I need, what I want. And now let's see how we can implement this with Jenkins Workflow. Here it is. Here is a sample of workflow scripts that you can deploy, you can implement with Jenkins Workflow. You will see here stages such as a dev stage. You will see here I do things on parallel with quality analysis done in parallel with performance test. Here you can see a node. I want to build this on Linux. I jump on another Linux box. I do things in parallel, so I have several boxes in parallel. I could jump on Mac OS X to build my iPhone application and so on. On many other constructs that I will detail later. All the things that I am presenting today are available now. This is not beta, this is 1.0. It has been released on December the 3rd. Some part of the things that I will demo are part of Jenkins open source. You can immediately get it on your Jenkins open source instance. Some others are part of Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees, which is our enterprise version of Jenkins. And this is automatically available as part of the release 14.11 for all our users. One more notice is that it's 1.0 and it has been in a beta version since May, with many people evaluating it, testing it, even using Workflow for production application. So we had a lot of feedback, and if you want to install it on your Jenkins open source, you need at least Jenkins 1.580, at least this, and you just have to install the Workflow aggregator plugin, which is a plugin that will install all the other plugins. So all this is available now. It's not a beta version. Let's move to the demo now. So let's look at the Jenkins user interface. In Jenkins, now you can create a new job, my workflow, and this type will be workflow. So we had freestyle project, Maven project, and many others. Now we have a new one, which is workflow. This is the way you create your workflow. And now I will show you one workflow. You can see here that it appears it's a very standard user interface for jobs. It's very similar, so no learning curve on this. And when I go on the configure, you can see that we reuse most of the existing Jenkins features. Discard all builds is the same. Parameterize build is the same. Build triggers, build periodically, poll SCM, all this is the same. What is different with workflow is that instead of adding steps on post-build steps to my job, I have one big workflow definition part where I define my script. To show how this script works, I will jump on my source code ID. Oh, I forgot to start it, sorry. But right now, I will start this, trigger this build so that we will see what it looks like. So here you can see it's always the same user experience. I will leave this page. My job is running. So this is very similar to what I used to have. While my job is running, I will show you what this script looks like. Sorry, it's starting. Oh, no, it is not this one. So here is my script. As you can see, this is Groovy script. Groovy is a standard scripting language in Jenkins. Jenkins admin use Groovy a lot. On here you can see all the stages of my build. So here I am in a build stage where I jump on a Linux box. I have a GitHub clone here. Then I will use Maven to build. Here I have a small method called ensure Maven where you can see that I will install a Jenkins tool, Maven 3. So this is a standard tool function in Jenkins. I am able to archive my generated WAR file. I am able to collect the unit results to publish them in my user interface, and so on. Let's go back to the user interface of Jenkins. So here you can see that my job is still running. I am in the stage QA of this job. Here it's running on Linux Slave 2, as you can see on my user interface. Another thing that I did not mention looking at the source code is that this is very standard Groovy script, so I can use my preferred IDE to design this flow. I have syntax highlighting, auto-completion, and so on. I will come back to the features that are available in this workflow. So the key feature that I have seen, the entire flow is defined as one concise Groovy script, so no longer small jobs, one Groovy script, where I have for loops, try finally, fork, and join, and so on. I can restart Jenkins while the flow is running. Technically, we use Java serialization of the executing Groovy script to implement this. My colleague JC would be able to give you more details if you want. Another key feature is that I am able to allocate slave nodes whenever I want on also workspaces in my on my slaves. Please remember that I cannot have a workspace that will span on several slaves in parallel for a parallel task. So a workspace spans on only one node, but I can create workspaces whenever I want. I am able to throttle the concurrency of the build with stages. So here I will come back to this scenario. If we look at my flow, compile and unit test, I will want to do in parallel builds as much as possible when developers push their code, but the performance test, I cannot do several in parallel because I will have just one performance test environment in my organization. So here I will want to throttle the concurrency to say compile and unit test as many as possible in parallel, performance test max one in parallel. Let's come back. I have human inputs on approval integrated in my flow so that people can validate. I will also apply security controls, authorization on this human interaction. And I can reuse all my standard project concepts, source code management, artifacts, reuse all the 1,000 plugins available in Jenkins open source. These are the key features that I have today. Then we have a question, why did we use a Groovy DSL and not a graphical workflow designer? It was a choice. So some people will prefer one or some people will prefer the other. The key benefit that we saw with Groovy DSL is that we could have familiar control flow constructions, the fork and join syntax and so on. All this is available and very elegant with Groovy DSL. Oops, sorry. I could have my familiar tools for building abstraction. I have functions, classes, variables, which are things that are very common to software engineers. All this is available in your Groovy script. I can store my workflow definition in a version control system. This is particularly popular with people who do DevOps. And these are things that are difficult with a graphical workflow designer. We expect that some people, that the community will probably provide a graphical workflow designer on top of this DSL, but the first step was to implement the DSL syntax. How do I set up a project with workflow today? So I have one workflow which is defined as one single job. So one single script for all the steps of my flow. I can reuse build triggers on parameters like in regular projects. On each workflow execution is a regular Jenkins build and is displayed in regular Jenkins views, so I can reuse all my assets, all the things that I know I have learned in Jenkins, all my custom plugins, my tools, I can reuse all this. Even if I said there is no graphical designer for the workflow, there are visualization of the execution of the workflow, which is possible. So here it's something also which is key. I will come back to my demo because my workflow has been running. I wanted to demo the user interaction, human interaction. So here you can see that my job is paused for pending input. And here I have a nice message. Does your staging app with this URL look good? If yes, we deploy on staging. So here I can test, and I have my pet clinic application, which is deployed. Here I have this nice button to trigger the deployment, but I will also see this in the execution of my job. You can see here that it's paused for input, so I am able to deploy to staging onto a board. And if I look at the logs, I also have this nice message with this nice URL on deploy to staging or a board. So here I will decide to deploy on staging, and you can see that the script continues. Let's come back on the features that are available with workflow. Non-sequential logic, you can see I do things in parallel, such as quality analysis with Sonar on performance tests with JMeter. Please keep in mind that a performance test or a Selenium test, it's not only running the test, but it first deploys the Java web application on Tomcat, restart Tomcat, maybe reinitialize a database, reload a database, then run the test and collect the results. So this is a complex action. I have for loops constructs. Here I am iterating on maybe the host names of my environment to trigger something with SSH. I have retries up to whatever number I want. Here I am doing a retry to test an HTTP URL, health check to see if my application is started or not. I have try catch, I have timeouts of jobs. All this non-sequential logic is available in my flow. Human interactions, I showed you on the demo. So the syntax is input message. I have my nice message. I can use Groovy templating to inject variables in it. And then you can see the submitter here is the security groups, because in a continuous delivery process, I will have dev people, QA people, and ops people working on the same flow execution with different roles on this flow. So here I say that to trigger this deployment of the application, only the QA people are allowed, the QA group. I can visualize this deploy button on the user interface, and I also have it in the logs of my Jenkins job. Restartable build on checkpoints. Here, if you remember, it's for transient error. I describe the scenario where my performance environment is under maintenance and I want to restart. So here I have my checkpoints on, the syntax is just checkpoint, and I am able to restart the workflow just from this point. Please note that this feature is part of Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees. It's not in Jenkins open source. Visualization, here it's also part of Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees. And we see this first visualization that we implemented is very familiar to the Jenkins users. We have this concept of stages. So if you use a delivery pipeline plugin, it's quite similar, where I have my dev stage, QA analysis stage, performance stage, QA stage, on staging stage. And I have the history for each job, how long it took. I am able to download my artifact that I generated, and I am able also to restart from checkpoints whenever I want. So here I will jump on a small demo. Here, this is the execution of my job. I can retry a job completely. I can also restart here. Here it's for, I can restart from a checkpoint, let's say enter in QA, and you will see that my job will restart just from the stage that I wanted, on which I did my checkpoint, and I don't restart the previous stages. So this is the graphical user interface that we propose as part of Jenkins Enterprise. Oops, I have to validate. So this is how checkpoints works with integrate with the new visualization. To continue with the concept of stage, it allows me to have this human readable naming in the execution of the flow. Here this screen fragment is part of Jenkins open source. It's the actual execution of the flow. So I will jump on the demo once more. On here it's the running steps. So here I can see all the steps that has been executed in my job. And if you remember, when I have for loops, here I retry, and I can see how many times it has been really retried, and I have access to the shell logs, to the logs of just this step, and not the complete logs. So it's much more easy to read what happens. So this is stages, and stages are also important for the max concurrency. I said for the performance environment, and I only have one performance environment, so I must just have one job running at once. Comprehensible scripts. So here, this is the deploy app function that I developed to deploy on Tomcat. So people who are familiar with Tomcat will know this shutdown.sh, root.war, startup.sh, so I can prepare my functions, that I bundle in my workflow. I can also share these functions in shared libraries because I can load Groovy scripts from libraries. And then I am able to have Jenkins experts implementing the workflow, and then Jenkins users using this kind of prepared functions. Then, so this was an overview of how workflow works. Alisa, do we have questions now, or shall I continue?
Jesse's been.
Please, yes,
okay.
Please continue. We're covering the
Thank
questions
you very
outlined.
much. So now, to give you an overview of what you can do with the workflow, I prepared a syntax card to give you an idea of the features that are available. Stage, as we said, human readable, and also concurrency. Node is to jump on a slave, on an executor. So typically Linux node, Windows node, macOS node. WS is to create a new workspace when I need to clean up my execution environment. Parallel is to run things in parallel, where I did performance test on Sonar, on Selenium in parallel. Retry, so I will retry up to n time. It can be useful for Selenium test because there may be glitches. So I will retry my Selenium test up to 3 times before deciding that the application code is broken. Catch error. So here I can catch an error on continue the execution. Timeout. So timeout is also something popular in Jenkins jobs. And to stop if I'm frozen. Input with human interactions. Please note that this human interaction, we can also use the HTTP API to interact with it, maybe from an external tool. Let's continue on the syntax. I have the load syntax. It allows me to load a Groovy script into my workflow script so that I can have the concept of shared libraries. The idea may also be to store the workflow definition with the source code of my project or in a source code repository instead of storing the definition in Jenkins configuration. So typically, I could have my workflow definition with my pet clinic source code, unload it. Step, this is a general build step to invoke existing plugins that do not yet have workflow syntax. So here I will show you a sample that I covered quickly with JUnit Result Archiver. So there is not yet the syntax, the integration in workflow with a beautiful step name such as JUnit result. So I use a general step with the class JUnit Result Archiver, and I pass all my parameters. This is a way I integrate my workflow with existing plugins who do not yet implement all the workflow syntax. Shell script, Windows batch scripts, very standard. Archive, unarchive. This is helpful to propagate a generated artifact between nodes. So I use this in my workflow to use the generated WAR file. So here you can see that I store the WAR file generated in the build compile stage. And then I will reuse this WAR file in the performance test stage. So here I unarchive the WAR file and I deploy it to Tomcat. So archive and unarchive are convenient to deploy applications, things like this. Echo is a standard echo. Dir is to change directory in my workspace to invoke another shell command somewhere else, for example. Read file, write file to interact with my workspace. Source code management tool, Git integration, SVN integration, general SCM to integrate with my SCM. Maybe because I use an other source code management tool, or maybe because all the syntax that I need in the current Git or SVN workflow syntax is not enough for me. Tool, I showed this in my demo to install Maven. So if you want to install Maven, JDK, things like this, you will use the tool instruction. Build here, this is to trigger another build. Typically in a transition phase, when you migrate your jobs to workflow, you may still want to invoke existing jobs before migrating everything, or maybe it makes sense to keep some external jobs like this. Another key thing is, which is part of Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees, is a checkpoint to capture the state and to be able to restart, as I showed. So this was the syntax card of Jenkins Workflow. I will show you something else which is very important when you develop your workflow. It's the snippet generator. So this will list you all the available steps available in the workflow, and it will help you to understand the syntax. So here I use the general SCM syntax, and maybe I will use Mercurial, for example, and I click on Generate Groovy to see the syntax of my SCM command. So this is the kind of thing that I can do. I will take another one. Like input, I forgot the syntax of input. Do you really want this? And then, as you can see, here I have my input syntax that is generated with the message on the OK button on parameters if I want. So this is the kind of thing. The snippet generator will help you to write your workflow. We also have some samples on GitHub that are available. So this was an overview of the syntax card of Jenkins Workflow. Now, the possible futures for workflow. Possible future for Jenkins open source. So here it depends on the community, what people want to do, and so on. The first thing will be more plugin interoperability. So you saw that there are some keywords reserved for plugins, and we will have more and more plugins. We will implement the APIs to be integrated as first-class citizens in the workflow. We expect also some work on multi-branch projects, how to better integrate with this. Then advanced SCM things like feature branching, things like this, which is also related to multi-branch. In IDE, editing support. So here you saw that I was using my IDE, IntelliJ, to edit my workflow, and then I copy-paste in Jenkins user interface, but we will try to do things more transparent in this landscape. And then some efforts also to have a more consistent syntax. So here it's a shell culture. Archive and unarchive are more than 3 characters, so some people say it's a bit too long and we should have a more consistent syntax. Possible future for Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees on Jenkins Operations Center. More visualization, so you have seen we have this stage view visualization. We also are working on a release view. We have a validated merge plugin, which allows you to have Jenkins acting as a Git repository so that you don't directly push your code to the real repository, but only to Jenkins. And if the build is successful, it's really propagated to the master repository, origin repository. So we want to integrate workflow with this. We also want to improve deployments to provide features such as blue-green deployments, better support of rollbacks, things like this. Also, the support imports migration from old style Jenkins builds to new style. For example, integrate freestyle jobs as shell steps in workflow. Also, import build flows as workflows. Please note here that many people like Groovy DSL, the DSL job DSL plugin. And today there is no automated way to convert your DSL jobs into workflows. Another feature that will be part of Jenkins Enterprise will be the templates integration. So in Jenkins Enterprise, we have this concept of templates, and we want to integrate this with workflows, so to have templates of workflows, which will be another style of what you can do with libraries. So these were the possible futures. Things are moving fast, so we have better integration every day, and this is probably the roadmap. How to get the code of the demo today? There is a gist with the Groovy script that I used, and also GitHub project, Spring Pet Clinic on my GitHub account, where you will also find this Groovy script of this workflow. So with this you can replay. You will have to install Tomcat on your computer and also to install Sonar, but this is very standard things for project teams. If you want more workflow resources, we have a tutorial on Jenkins open source GitHub repository. We have CloudBees. We have a user guide of the workflow in our Jenkins Enterprise docs. And we are planning more webinars also, which will come soon. So these are the resources. All this webinar today also is recorded, so you will have access to all these hyperlinks and so on. This was workflow in Jenkins. Please feel free to ask for any questions to Jesse. I've heard that he answered already to many questions. I don't know exactly which one, but I guess he did a great job. To Steve or to me, so please feel free to ask for any question.
Thanks, Cyrille. So as Cyrille mentioned, at this time, if you have questions or additional questions, please go ahead and input them in the Q&A window. We have about 9 minutes left to answer questions. So let me go through the list and see which one that Jesse has not answered, and maybe we can help. Slide deck will be available somewhere. Yes, it's going to be available after the webinar, and we will send out the recording to everyone who registered. Okay, let me see. What mechanism does archive, unarchive use? Do you define your own revision system for it? And that's by Roy Corey. If Cyrille, if you want to answer that one.
What?
Want to repeat it again, Alyssa?
Sorry.
Yeah. What mechanism does archive/unarchive use? Do you define your own revision system for it?
No, it's just a way to store the, to propagate files, artifacts in your job. So it's not a revisioning system on stuff like this. It's just local to your job, on when you delete this execution, it disappears. So it's a kind of vehicle in your job.
Okay, thanks, Cyrille. And Jesse had put in a text answer for that as well.
Okay.
Okay, so Jesse's answering Anthony's question, so we'll leave that alone. A question from Kenneth McNeil. Do you offer transition services to help adopt the solution?
I think with our partners, we have consulting partners. We will be able to help customers, to do this transition. So here, we can share with you. We can introduce you to our partners to make this happen, for sure.
Okay, great. Thanks.
On our website, there is also the list of our partners that is available.
Okay, next question by Richard Sargent. Can I get the Jenkins workflow to integrate with heat orchestration on OpenStack?
I don't know, sorry. I don't know enough OpenStack to be able to answer to this question.
Maybe Jesse can answer that one if he knows.
Or we'll try to cover it in the follow-up, because as Alyssa said, we'll capture the Q&A and publish it on the CloudBees website when we're done here too. So we'll try to chase that one down.
Yes. Let me see. There's a question. Can we set up triggering of the build inside the workflow?
So here, I would use human interactions. I remember somebody asking for build triggers that will not trigger the very beginning of the flow, but something in the middle. This would be complex. With Groovy scripting, we could do something like this. Otherwise, maybe with input syntax, you can get triggers from external systems.
There's some questions in the chat window, Cyrille.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take that first one from Cecile John. How do we figure out the generic step interface for the existing plugins?
You use a snippet generator. Step. Sorry, I have to find it. So with a snippet generator, general build step, you are able, for example, so here are the ones that match today, publish java.doc, and you will see the parameters. So here, please note that the plugin, to integrate a plugin with the general build step instruction, your plugin must implement a reasonably recent version of Jenkins API. So there is a work of migration. And this is, for example, the case of the JUnit plugin. There is an API to implement in your build step. Maybe Jesse remembers the name of the API, but so there is a bit of many plugins will have to be upgraded, to be integrated.
Okay.
And you use the snippet generator as I can share on my okay. Jesse answered your build step has to implement simple build step interface. I forgot if it's an interface or a class to extend, but to be integrated with the general build step. And you use the snippet generator as I share on my screen to discover the syntax.
Okay, so next question. Are all of the Groovy functions generic, or these are predefined functions?
You define your own Groovy function. You can define the functions that you want. Currently, I'm not aware of people who have prepared Groovy libraries for Jenkins Workflow, but this may come soon.
All right.
That we would be able to share on GitHub.
Okay, next question. As far as I saw, it's more for Java development. How good workflow will do for Windows development environment with Visual Studio and TFS source control environment?
So here we have the Windows batch script execution. So here I can invoke the .NET MS Build tool. And I didn't make a test with the TFS SCM, but I'm pretty sure that it integrates. So I'm confident it will work. Then I don't know very well the .NET specific plugins in Jenkins to know how they match, how they can integrate, but they will integrate soon. It's not because the syntax is in Groovy that it's specific to Java things, I could say.
Okay, so I think we have time for just one more question. Do you have support for Docker containers?
Yes, so this is not related to, not specific to workflow. It's a general subject for Jenkins, and there are many people who work on better integration of Jenkins with Docker. On at CloudBees, we have engineers who work on this a lot, and I'm aware. I have in mind Okidoki, who works on provisioning slaves as Docker containers. So how to use Docker for Jenkins slaves. And there are also other people who work on how to build Docker images as part of your build, as an output of your build. So here there are a lot of things around Jenkins and Docker. And this will integrate with workflow probably through, if it's related to the slave provisioning, so it will be out of the box in workflow. And if it's steps to generate Docker images, maybe with a general build step, because they will be very new plugins, so they will implement a simple build step or extend simple build step. So they will be compatible.
All right, thanks, Cyrille. So it looks like we are out of time. I'm going to leave the Q&A window and the chat window open for a few more minutes after the end of our presentation. So please feel free to input your questions and or comments. We will capture all these questions and answers. We'll put them on our website, and we will include the link in our follow-up email along with the recording. So I wanted to say thank you to Cyrille, Steve, and of course very much Jesse for today's webinar, but especially thank you to all of our attendees who spent time with us today to learn more about Jenkins. That is it. For any questions that we don't get to, please go ahead and continue to put those questions in the window, and we'll send you a follow-up email. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.